The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Hello folks, welcome to a brand new county. For the very first time on TVI, we're in Shropshire this week, and we're beginning this episode at the border between Shropshire and Staffordshire. Behind me there you can see we have a lock, and that is on the Shropshire Union Canal. It's called Tiley Lock, and you can find it on the border of the parish of Sutton upon Tern. Sutton upon Tern, South Farm on a powerful river. Welcome everyone to the county of Shropshire for the very first time on TVI. There are 201 parishes to cover in this West Midlands county, so settle in for the long haul. We'll be back here several times over quite a number of years to get this one done. It's one of the most rural counties in England and is known for being the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, particularly at the Iron Bridge Gorge, which is a World Heritage Site. It's also famous for its stunning, unspoiled countryside and its historic market towns like Ludlow and Shrewsbury. But that's all to come in future episodes. We're beginning the county in the countryside to the south of the lovely town of Market Drayton, and first up on our list is Sutton upon Tern. This is a good one to start with because it's a very typical Shropshire parish, very rural and scattered everywhere. Sutton upon Tern is based around a hamlet of the same name, almost right at its centre. It sits just to the south of Market Drayton Golf Club between two major roads, the A41 and the A529. The parish's eastern boundary is marked by part of the route of the Shropshire Union Canal. In this one we'll be discussing a battle and also the military. We have some lovely old buildings to admire too, like Rose Hill Mill. In the village of Woodseaves and the hamlet of Turnhill, we'll even see two types of railway. In all, this is a very varied one and a great advert for Shropshire as a whole. Let's go. Here we have Sutton upon Tern as it appeared on maps at the turn of the 20th century. Notice how this was not its own parish at that time. This was instead part of the old Drayton in Hales, which covered a huge area in the northeast of Shropshire. Sutton upon Tern parish covers a lot more than just the hamlet at the centre of it that has the same name. Way more in fact. Generally speaking, Sutton's boundaries take in the rural area between the A41 to the west and the Shropshire Union Canal to the east. It includes the villages of Woodseaves and Buntingsdale, the hamlets of Sutton Heath, Crickmary, Rosehill, Coleshurst and Turnhill, and the relatively large Market Drayton Golf Club. Aside from Buntingsdale and the golf club, relatively little has altered around here. It was hard to know exactly what to zoom in on here given this one is so spread out, but here's Sutton upon Tern itself. It is literally just like this today, very rural with nothing much to speak of barring farms. How this is the name of the parish is a little beyond me. This is Woodseaves, which had far more and still does today, even though the school and the Methodist chapel you see on this map are no longer in use. Both still stand though. Woodseaves also has another feature these days which will appeal to the railway enthusiasts out there. Buntingsdale has changed almost beyond recognition. In 1900 there was a huge country house and a large parkland here. Today it's a lot more built up and it's effectively the centre of Sutton's modern population. That hall though is still very much standing. This won't be an episode that has a lot in the way of walking. For the most part, we'll be driving around Sutton upon Tern because everything of note is scattered far and wide, a long way from the small hamlet at the centre of it all. I suspect a lot of Shropshire will be like this. We'll basically work this one from east to west, beginning at the parish boundary in the small hamlet of Tyrley on the Shropshire Union Canal. We'll then go to the Four Alls Inn on the A529 before working our way south to Woodseaves. We have 3 things to cover there. Sutton-upon-Tern itself will follow that, but it'll only be a fleeting visit. Aside from a farm or two, there's still nothing really in it. What's to the north of it though is very interesting. It's a golf club which was the site of a battle some centuries ago. After that, still in the car, we'll make our way to the A41 via Coleshurst and Rosehill, stopping to admire the lovely Rosehill Mill in the latter. The A41 is the western parish boundary for a distance, and it runs between a place called Buntingsdale and the site of the former RAF Turnhill. Buntingsdale will afford us a little walk as we discover the link between it and the base, and we have that country house to discuss there too. Finally, we'll cover the old railway station at Turnhill, located in a piece of the parish that's only joined to the rest via a tiny strip of land. Let's start this trip around the parish of Sutton-upon-Tern at the Shropshire Union Canal. In front of us here is the Tyrley Canal cutting, which is also known as the Woodseaves cutting. The lock you can see is Tyrley Lock, one of several along the canal's main line. Tyrley Wharf used to serve as a small dock above a flight of 5 locks. In 1911 it was used to load milk churns, which were then taken by barge from the Peatswood estate to the Cadbury's chocolate factory at Knighton. This is the first time we've ever seen the Shropshire Union Canal in a main episode. We did briefly see it in Chester though. Even though most of it is within Shropshire, the network has branches in Staffordshire and Cheshire, and even extends over the border into Wales. It links the canal system of the West Midlands at Wolverhampton with the River Mersey and the Manchester Ship Canal at Ellesmere Port. This is the main line, which was the last trunk narrow canal route to be built in England and wasn't completed until 1835. It was the last major civil engineering accomplishment of Thomas Telford. The name Shropshire Union comes from the amalgamation of various smaller companies, including the Ellesmere Canal, the Chester Canal, the Birmingham and Liverpool Junction Canal, and the Montgomeryshire Canal. They came together to form the Shropshire Union Railways and Canal Company in 1847. The main line between Nantwich and Otherley Junction was almost built as a railway, although eventually it was decided to construct it as a waterway instead. This cutting was dug in 1832, 3 years before the Shropshire Union Canal network was fully completed. This is the longest cutting on any canal in Britain. It's about 2.7 kilometres long and has a maximum depth of about 21.3 metres. It's also an SSSI these days too.
Now, for the most part in these early Shropshire episodes, I'm going to be doing a lot of driving around because Shropshire is a very, very rural county. So from here at Tyrley Lock, we're going to head deeper into Shropshire, and that means heading down this road here. We're heading for a pub next called the Four Alls. The Four Alls. We've met one of those before, haven't we? Do you remember Lancashire? If not, you're about to.
Not far away from the canal is a small hamlet which is called Four Alls. This is considered by many to be part of the village of Woodseaves, but it's a long way up the A529. In any event, there's a pub here called the Four Alls Inn. This is the second time we've seen a pub with this name. Last time we did, we were in Pendle in a place called Higham, but both pubs get their titles in the same way. The name represents the king, who rules all, the soldier, who fights for all, the priest, who prays for all, and the peasant, who pays for all. The Four Alls boldly claims it's Shropshire's premier gastropub. It prides itself on serving exceptional home-cooked food and traditional ales. It's also a perfect venue for weddings, parties, and business events. Your four-legged friends are also welcome in its bar area. Incidentally, if you were to head north along the A529 from this pub, you'd pass the site of Tyrley Castle. It was built after the Norman conquest by the Pantulfs. The castle was succeeded by a manor house which fell into disrepair, and today there's an 18th century farmhouse built on its site. We are heading south next, down the A529 towards the rest of Woodseaves. It's a notable little place actually, considered to be the midpoint of the longest north to south axis of the UK. It sits in the far southeastern corner of Sutton upon Tern's boundaries. It's on a junction where the road splits into two pieces. It has an old school and a former Methodist chapel, but its main attraction is railway themed. You can't board a train into Market Drayton from it, but take yourself down this road into the village and you can definitely catch something.
Okay, so this is Woodseaves and there's not much to it, but the railway enthusiasts out there will know a bit about this place, you would have thought, because over there's a miniature railway.
Opened in 2004, this is the Woodseaves Miniature Railway. It's a complex line that runs through the grounds of the Woodseaves Garden Plants Nursery. Trains are operated by a Romulus and Roanoke petrol locomotive. The line is a 7¼ inch job, which is over 450 metres long. In 2008, the line was extended to include a route avoiding the station area. There are now route variations through 2 loops around the nursery and the gardens. It operates on Sundays, Wednesdays and bank holidays, usually from Easter until September every year. Here's the old school, located where the 2 roads of Woodseaves village meet each other. This has been closed for several decades, as you can probably tell. Any school children living in this part of the parish these days likely attend school in Hinstock, just down the A529. And this is the old chapel just a stone's throw away back up the A529. This was the Woodseaves Wesleyan Methodist Chapel and it was built in 1896 and 97. The local Wesleyans previously met in private houses, one belonging to Mr. Hill. The chapel celebrated its first anniversary in May 1898. It was still in use in 1941, but it's not explicitly clear when it closed. It has now ceased to be used for religious worship, having been sympathetically converted into a house. It gained an extension in modern times. Now for a drive through Sutton upon Tern, and to say this is the main village in the parish, it's ridiculously small. Sutton upon Tern is little more than a hamlet and it lies on the River Tern, a powerful waterway according to its Welsh derivation. Sutton never used to be its own parish. Instead, it was part of the much larger Drayton in Hales, which was abolished in 1914. That means the first census entry for Sutton couldn't actually be made until 1921, when it had a total population of 512. That figure soon began to grow, and by 1961 the population had tripled in size to 1,622. Now, as you can probably tell, there's nowhere near 1,600 people that live in Sutton itself. Although the population has slowly been declining since, the majority live in Buntingsdale. Sutton has remained very rural and reliant on farming. Part of its former farmland is now used for the sport of golf. If you drive north from the centre of the hamlet, you're heading for the site of Market Drayton Golf Club. Let's do that next, because it's got a tale to tell us. Market Drayton Golf Club is a tranquil, picturesque and challenging course that was laid out on its current site in 1926, originally as a 9-hole course. It was actually founded some 20 years before that though, in 1906, and this is the third site on the outskirts of the town that it's occupied. In its early days, the club had 70 playing members, with men paying a 2-guinea subscription and the ladies 1 guinea. Ever since, it's actively promoted the idea of golf for all. Men, women, juniors and seniors all play here, with current membership ranging from 5 years of age to 91. Among its professionals, the most famous is Bert Gadd, appointed in 1927 and winner of the French Open in 1933 and the Irish Open at Royal Portrush in 1937. Some of his clubs have now been restored and are displayed along with the other important artifacts in the clubhouse. This didn't become an 18-hole course until 1988, following the purchase and development of some newly acquired land. The naturally draining terrain it sits on has matured into a parkland and heathland course, supporting a rich variety of wildlife. Some of the fairways run around and through Brown Hill Wood and the historic Salisbury Hill. These together were the scene of the gathering of the Earl of Salisbury's troops before the Battle of Blore Heath in 1459. We're still driving, which is a really good way to know we're in a sparsely populated area. Next up, we're going south towards the A41 and through 2 small hamlets called Coleshurst and Rosehill. Now, there's nothing greatly special about Coleshurst, except for maybe its small fishery. Fishing, though, is also something you can do in Rosehill, at the Rosehill carp fishery that's almost next door. The pond you use for that is overlooked by a very historic and picturesque mill, which is well worth stopping to have a look at. So we will.
Fun one this, isn't it? These narrow, tight, twisty lanes. It's everything I expected Shropshire to be.
Rosehill Mill was a water-powered corn crusher, and the carp fishery opposite used to be its mill pond. Both are considered to be part of Stoke Heath, which lies mainly over the parish boundary to the southwest, marked by the A41. Nice spot this in all. The A41 at this point is an old Roman road. On maps, it's referred to as the Longford. It gives its name to the village of Longford in Moreton Say, just to the north of where we are. By 1319, it was a royal road between Bletchley to the north and Hinstock to the south. Between those two villages, the A41 passes through an area called Tern-Hill, which gave its name to an RAF base. RAF Tern-Hill is to the left-hand side of the screen right now. It closed in 1976 as an active RAF base, but it's still in use, partially by the British Army. The technical and administrative site became Borneo Barracks, which was later renamed Clive Barracks in honour of Major General Robert Clive. The airfield part of the site was retained by the RAF and is now known as Tern-Hill Airfield. Any flying that takes place here now is predominantly relief landing for helicopters of the No. 1 Flying Training School based at RAF Shropshire, although Turnhill is also used by the RAF's No. 632 Volunteer Gliding Squadron. It's Clive Barracks though, which has more of a presence here today.
So it feels like we've been driving around forever, but we finally got to a place that resembles some kind of village. This is Buntingsdale, and this is where most of Sutton-upon-Tern's population live.
This is Buntingsdale on the other side of the A41. This village wasn't on the map at the beginning of this episode, but today this is where most of the population of Sutton-upon-Tern live. The reason is simply because this is the service family accommodation for the barracks. Whilst most of the barracks is off limits to us, these housing estates are not behind the wire, so to speak. They consist of two areas, Buntingsdale Park, which is mainly officers' housing, and the Buntingsdale Estate, which is for other ranks. Buntingsdale, although military related, has things which we would consider to be very normal in a standard English village. There's a play area, for example, in the middle of it, which serves the children of the barrack families. They also have a school they can go to here as well. In 2012, Buntingsdale changed from an infant and nursery school to a primary and nursery school, and that's how we find it today. It has pupils in all year groups, with the annual admission number for each being 15. Being within close proximity to the army base, both civilian and armed service families attend the school. This presents its own challenges. Staff here are skilled in managing the often unavoidable movement that's a feature of active military service life. Then there's the Rangers Community Centre in the middle of the village, which again is military related. You can see there's a British flag flying at the entrance too. If I didn't know better, I'd say the huge building behind this is an old aircraft hangar. What do you think? Buntingsdale Hall has its own connection to the armed forces. When the RAF were around, this was the HQ of No. 22 Squadron. The hall, though, wasn't purpose-built for the RAF. Instead, this has been here since the early 18th century. Buntingsdale Hall is a historic country house which became a Grade 2 listed building on the 14th of February 1979. It was first built for Bulkley Mackworth and the Mackworth family between 1719 and 1721. The plans for the building were drawn up by London architect and surveyor John Prince. Prince would only be the initial designer though, as the building was completed by Francis Smith of Warwick. The reason for this change of architect is believed to be down to Mackworth. Documents suggest there was a dispute between him and Prince, and so he was dismissed. Her Herbert Mackworth later sold the hall to his cousin William Taylor, who owned the property for many years. This is why the road that leads to the house today is called Taylor Drive. The current owners are once again the Mackworths, direct descendants of Bulkley Mackworth himself. Buntingsdale Hall would go on to be No. 22 Squadron's base, and it's possible they were even formed here in 1943. By 1969 there was a modern kitchen serving the original dining room in the north wing, but there were very few other facilities for RAF staff. Officers who lived in here didn't actually sleep in the hall. Instead, they had separate sleeping accommodation in nearby huts. When the squadron was disbanded in 1972, there was a simple ceremony which saw the RAF ensign at Buntingsdale lowered for the last time. In 1986, a survey was conducted of the property which revealed several furnishings had been stolen from the hall. By 2000, the hall was in disrepair and was placed on the Historic Buildings at Risk register. Subsequently, it was renovated and was finally removed from the register in 2004. The grounds have been altered several times. Indeed, there were many instances during the 18th and 19th centuries. These modifications saw a kitchen garden, grassland, a large fish pond, and a boathouse all be added. By the end of the 19th century, a new lodge had been added too. The River Tern passes to the north of Buntingsdale Hall, with the main garden retaining wall west of the house. The estate formerly included the remains of Ford Hall Castle, which is a ringwork and bailey located some 390 metres west of the main building.
Now then, Shropshire people, you guys will never have seen me before because, as I said at the beginning of this video, it's the first time I've touched the county. Now, when I come to a place that I've never done before, I leave one of these cards on the parish notice board. Now, it was pointless stopping in Sutton upon Tern itself to do this because, as you've seen, it's a very small place. It's better to do this in a place that's got most of the population, i.e. Buntingsdale. So here's the parish notice board, which is next to the school. I'm going to leave one of these cards on here so that people can see I've been. Job done. The last stop on the trip through Sutton upon Tern for us is the hamlet of Tern Hill. This is a bit of a strange place because Tern Hill occupies a triangular piece of land that's almost an exclave. It's only connected to the rest of the parish via a small strip of land over the A41. Even more weirdly, not all of Tern Hill falls within Sutton. The A41 splits it into two pieces, with the eastern part connected to Moreton Say. However, the western portion, which is within Sutton, has the most interesting bit anyway. It was the site of Tern Hill railway station. Tern Hill railway station was opened in 1867 and closed in 1963. It was notable for its pagoda shelter adjacent to the booking office. Today, on the site of the old station, you'll find Tony Hamer & Sons, a gravel and sand supplier. Their current yard was once part of the station complex. To mark this piece of history, there's a replica train outside on the road. That's a nice touch. Nothing remains of the station now because it was completely demolished, due mainly to road improvements at the busy junction between the A41 and the A53. Passenger numbers were always very small at Tern Hill, although the building of the RAF's aerodrome did boost its usage in the 1920s. Most people that used the line through here, the Wellington to Nantwich, were heading for Market Drayton, a busy, bustling market town. Right, that's one down and just the 200 to go in Shropshire. Easy stuff that, we'll have them done in no time. Well, if only it was that easy. We have 4 more to cover this week and we're not going too far to get to number 2. Join me tomorrow as we visit another scattered parish, just like this one. Hello folks, welcome back to Shropshire for round number 2. Now today we've got more of a village to explore, although this one is still as scattered as Sutton upon Tern, which you saw yesterday. There are loads of little hamlets in this one, just like Sutton upon Tern. But there is a main village, and it does have a church. That's something we didn't see yesterday. Here is this lovely church made of brick, as you can see there, and you can find that beautiful building in the parish of Moreton Say. Moreton Say, marsh farm belonging to Robert de Say. Today in Shropshire we're in another scattered parish, one that's very similar to the one we saw yesterday. This is Moreton Say, which contains a lot of small hamlets and one main village, that of Moreton Say itself. We'll be mainly driving around this one once again. Moreton Say has 3 main landmarks in the village. They are a school, a village hall and a church, and all 3 are literally within a 5-minute walk of each other. They're all worth a look, but the more interesting part of this parish lies to the northeast. One of the hamlets within Moreton Say is called Styche, where you can find the massive Styche Hall. That was associated for years with the Clive family, the same bunch that Clive Barracks at Buntingsdale was named after. Robert Clive, the first Baron Clive, was alternatively known as Clive of India. It was he who was credited with securing India and the wealth that followed for the British Crown. He was born in the parish at Styche Hall and is buried in St Margaret's Church in Moreton Say. We have a mill to see otherwise, but for the rest of the time we'll be driving through the countryside. In all, Moreton Say parish covers an area of nearly 6,000 acres and includes Longford, Bletchley, Styche and the eastern part of Turnhill. There's lots to cover, so let's get moving. Here we have Moreton Say parish, a sparsely populated and scattered area to the north of Market Drayton, near the borders with Cheshire and Staffordshire. It's sometimes spelled with an E on the end of Say, and some people even call it Moreton Sea, like the wavy ocean thing. There have always been a limited number of businesses and facilities in this area. There are still no shops or services within the village itself. As a result, the only employment opportunities are at the local primary school, a residential home, and some surrounding farms. With some 6,000 rural acres covered by Moreton Say parish, you'd be forgiven for thinking there's going to be very little of note around here. Well, you'd be wrong. Let's zoom into the village itself and see what it had back in 1900. Moreton Say has changed very little since these times. The church and the school you see on this map are still very much here, and they're still going. It's gained a village hall, which was built in the 1960s, but otherwise the only other additions are of a residential nature. There is far more to Moreton Say than just the village. It was impossible to show all of the parish on the old maps, but given the area hasn't changed much, it means we can just take a look at the modern map instead. Here's how we'll get around this one. We'll start on the A41 at Bletchley, where we'll check out a pub. After that, it's a drive into Moreton Say village for a little walk around, where we'll cover the 3 main landmarks the place has. As you can see, the country lanes to the north form a neat little loop through most of the other hamlets. We'll drive to them all in turn, heading in a clockwise direction. Audley Brow will be first, where there's a mill. Then it'll be Styche, which is where the very historic Styche Hall is located. Longslow and Longford will then finish us off as we end up on the A53 Market Drayton bypass. We begin on the A41 in a place called Bletchley. This is the northern end of the Roman road, the Longford, which the A41 follows the length of these days. Just to the north of Turnhill, Bletchley is little more than a hamlet, but it does have one major landmark. That would be the Castle. It's a pub which occupies a prime position for passing trade. A few years ago, this was on the market for a whopping £925,000. It's certainly a business that's worth a few bob. It's been here since at least 1938 and used to get a lot of interest from RAF staff.
During World War II, the Castle Inn was used by the officers at RAF Turnhill, and even after the war it saw a lot of business. During the 1950s, all the way through to the 1970s, the Castle Inn saw a busy coach trade because it was an ideal halfway stop on the journey to North Wales from the Midlands. Earlier this year, the manager of this pub was left shocked after being nominated for an award. It had been closed for a refurbishment for most of the year before it reopened in August, and since then it scooped a nomination for the Best Midlands Pub in the 2025 Countryside Alliance Awards. Let's drive on into Moreton Say next, leaving Bletchley behind. It has no pub of its own, and so the residents of the main village consider the castle to be their local. Really, a pub is the only thing, in my opinion, that the village could do with. It does have 3 other regular village landmarks though.
Okay, so with Bletchley covered then, we are now in Moreton Say. Now there are 3 landmarks in this village of note. One of them is the church. You already know that because you saw that at the beginning of this episode. There's also a village hall here, and there's a school too.
So, there are 3 main landmarks in Moreton Say. They are the school, a church, and this village hall. This communal venue plays an essential role within this community and is an important place for village events. It was opened in 1963 by the villagers and remains their main go-to space. The building comprises a large main hall which can accommodate a maximum of 100 people. Size-wise, it's 11 metres square, which is large enough to accommodate a bouncy castle. There's a fully modernised kitchen which has a serving hatch opening into the main hall. Moreton Say Primary is a co-educational C of E controlled school with around 90 pupils on its roll. Children at this school are separated into 4 classes of mixed ages with 2 year groups in each. It's all maintained by Shropshire Council. The school is located in its original buildings, which were completed in 1871, but it does also have an extension that was added in 2003 to house the Goslings nursery class. A second extension was added in 2006 in order to increase its office space. The school is set within large grounds which include access to its own extensive on-site forest. That means all children learn and explore both inside and outside the classroom from the minute they join. The nearest secondary school to the village is the Grove in Market Drayton, which is 4 miles away. Next we have the church, which is much older than it appears. Dedicated to St Margaret of Antioch, it dates back to the 12th century when it was founded as a chapel of Hodnet. The current structure was completed in 1788, and that fact should be immediately obvious given the brick exterior. It comprises a chancel and a nave with a porch to the south and a square steeple tower to the west, which contains 2 bells. The bells were left to the parishioners by the commissioners of Edward VI in 1553, along with another small bell, a silver chalice and a pattern. The brick walls were added to conceal a much older inner stone structure. There's a fine west gallery and a beautiful stained glass east window by Kemp in here. Also, there's a very elaborate memorial to Jane Vernon, flanked by stone effigies of her 2 husbands. Jane Vernon was responsible for the building of the West Gallery in 1634, and in 1642 a charming wooden memorial to 3 of her sisters was placed in the north wall of the chancel. The interior has a number of monuments to other local families. These include Lord Clive, otherwise known as Clive of India. He was the man considered responsible for British associations in India. He was buried within the walls of the church on the 30th of November 1774. There's a bit more coming on him in a little while.
Now, there's supposed to be a war memorial in there somewhere, but I haven't seen it. It's either I'm blind or it's just not there anymore. And to be fair, either could be likely. Never mind, doesn't matter. Now, that's pretty much it for Moreton Say village. But the parish, well, it's a bit bigger than this, as you're about to see.
Now we're off to explore the rural area to the north of Moreton Say. You don't have to go very far to find another little hamlet. It's called Audley Brow, and through it there flows a little stream called the River Ducko. On it there used to be a mill. It's no longer working, but it still stands. Now, I found next to nothing about this mill, but be careful if you try to research it yourself. There are two Moreton mills in Shropshire. The one you're more likely to find stuff about online is Moreton Mill at Shawbury. That one was originally a forge for making wrought iron. It was used intermittently from the early 17th century and was rebuilt between 1759 and 61. That was perhaps in response to a change in the technology of iron making. Not that that helps us out here, but it's an interesting little factoid, I guess. Let's move on to Styche. These lanes around Moreton Say parish ain't very wide. This one into Styche isn't exactly an exception to the rule. You have to be pretty careful on roads like these. This is New Street Lane, which is a dead end and runs into Styche. At the end of the road is Styche Hall. Styche Hall has quite a notable place in history. This was the birthplace of Clive of India, who was considered one of the great heroes of the British Empire. He would certainly not have known the Styche Hall that stands here today, though. The original Styche Hall was a black and white Elizabethan building. The Clives had it rebuilt in the 1760s. During World War II, soldiers were stationed here in some sort of capacity, but unfortunately nobody knows what that exact role was. The belief, though, is that this was the site of an American army camp. There can be no denying Styche Hall remains a really impressive and important historic building to Moreton Say, but this is as close as we can get to it. So with nothing else to really say about it, let's fill in a bit more about Clive of India, who lived in this bit of Moreton Say very many years ago. Robert Clive, who later became known as Baron Clive of Plassey, played an early part in the establishment of British imperial control of India. He became the effective ruler of Bengal and was a controversial figure in his own time. As a founder of the empire in India, he was idolised by many in Britain as a hero, although it has to be said in more recent times, views have altered somewhat. Clive was born into a gentry family from Market Drayton, but was variously educated in Cheshire, London and Hertfordshire. After his schooling, he accepted a clerkship with the East India Company, arriving in Madras in June of 1744 after a long and arduous passage lasting 15 months. Having been notably aggressive as a boy, Clive was subject to fits of depression as a man. Finding himself friendless and isolated in India, he attempted suicide twice, but on both occasions his pistol failed to fire. Some might say that was a stroke of luck, because his reputation as a military commander was soon to be established. That came during his first two spells in India, either side of a sojourn in England. Untrained as a soldier, he entered into the East India Company's military service after taking part in defensive action at Fort St. David against the company's French counterpart. The key engagements that made his name were the Siege of Arco in 1751 and the recapture of Calcutta thereafter, and the Battle of Plassey in 1757, at which his army defeated French forces and those of the Mughal Emperor Viceroy Siraj-ud-Dowlah, the Nawab of Bengal. Victory at Plassey was revenge for the Black Hole of Calcutta, a dungeon in which some British prisoners of the Nawab had died the previous year. Clive's manoeuvrings left the East India Company in a position of sovereign supremacy in Bengal and made him the effective ruler of the region. As early as 1759, Clive suggested to the leading politician Pitt the Elder that the Indian territories could be brought under the direct control of the British state. This didn't happen for another century, but Clive is still seen as the originator of British rule over India. He returned to England in 1760 and was made Baron Clive of Plassey 2 years later. In 1764 he returned to Bengal with the title of Governor and Commander-in-Chief and consolidated the East India Company's rule. He has been credited by some for introducing positive administrative reforms. However, the policies of the East India Company, in particular a punitive land tax, have also been blamed for causing or exacerbating a disastrous famine in 1770, which is reckoned to have killed 10 million people. By that time, Clive was back in Britain anyway, having amassed a huge personal fortune. Even in the 1740s, he'd showed his acquisitive nature by charging personal levies on all goods purchased by the East India Company's army. In the aftermath of Plassey, he received presents worth £234,000. Clive's fortune bought him a grand townhouse in Berkeley Square in London, which is now marked with a blue plaque. He also held estates in Surrey, Shropshire, Monmouthshire and Ireland. Such conspicuous displays of wealth inevitably led to a great deal of resentment, though. Clive would soon acquire a seat in the House of Commons and became the subject of a parliamentary inquiry into corruption. He was defiant, telling its chair that given the opportunities he had for self-enrichment, that he stood astonished at his own moderation. As rich as he was, his fortune couldn't buy him health and happiness. He died in 1774 at his home in Berkeley Square in mysterious circumstances and was rather hastily buried at the church in Moreton Say. It was widely believed that he took his own life via an accidental overdose of opium. Over recent years, views of Clive have tended towards the negative as the history of the British Empire has been subjected to more critical appraisal. The historian William Dalrymple called him a vicious asset stripper. Others have presented him more as a product of a corrupt system. To end this episode, we have two little hamlets to drive through, and by doing this we'll complete a circuit of Moreton Say parish. First up, it's Longslow, which doesn't have much more than just a cattery, a couple of farms and a collection of houses. Longslow is a typical example of the sort of small hamlet you'll find in this area. The vast majority of the population has been, or indeed still is, employed in agriculture. At present, this is still a sector where a lot of local people work. With no shops or businesses in the village, around half the working population of Moreton Say parish commute to their place of work. This is usually Market Drayton, but with the A41 and the A53 close by, getting to bigger places like Shrewsbury, for example, is pretty simple from here. And lastly, we have Longford, which is similar to Longslow. This one does at least have something of note. It takes its name from the Roman road that runs through Shropshire to Bletchley, the same one that's now the A41. And that's pretty much it for Moreton Say. Our next job is to make our way up the A53 and around the edge of Market Drayton. Eventually, you'll come to a roundabout if you do that, where the A529 crosses the Market Drayton bypass. We're going to need that to get to the next parish. See you later. Hello folks, welcome back to Shropshire again. Now in this episode we will actually get a little walk. It's amazing. We're 3 episodes in and we haven't really walked around at all yet, have we? Well, this place is definitely more of a village than the ones you've seen so far. Now, in this village there's a cross. You see that cross right there? That is on a very nice village green. Now what that cross signifies is that this place used to be more important than Market Drayton. Can you believe that? Welcome to Adderley. Adderley, Ealdrith's Clearing. Today on TVI we're in Adderley, which is described on the village's very own website as a nice place to be. I reckon that could well be right, because it has a ton of features that make it lovely. The one that sticks out for me is the Shropshire Union Canal, which borders the village to the east. The lockkeeper on the canal in Adderley thought so too, and once decked out the banks of it with a floral display that won him and the canal an award. Adderley is only a small village in the grand scheme of things, but this place used to be more important than Market Drayton. In the older part of the village there's a green upon which you can find a cross. That was a market cross, and it would have been well known to people that passed through Adderley from Nantwich to the Midlands. You see, it was on a major salt route, and so trade was once thriving here. The west of the parish was once dominated by 2 huge parklands, which were conjoined at one point. They belonged to 2 of the wealthiest families Shropshire has ever known. One of them originated in Northern Ireland, and they owned Shavington Hall. The other were the Corbetts, who came from France with the Normans. They were associated with Adderley Hall and lent their name to several landmarks around the village. They include Raven House, thanks to the derivation of their family name. So let's have a look at Adderley and see it all. Here's what Adderley Parish looked like in 1900. It was a mixture of farmland and parkland at this time, with the western sections dominated by the latter. That was all owned by the estates of Adderley Hall and Shavington Hall, where the 2 most important families here lived. Adderley had a railway line which you can see on this map. It skirted the edge of the village on its route between Nantwich and Market Drayton. There was a station here, but both it and the line have since disappeared, lost in some places under some modern housing. The village itself was only a small thing between the line and the swathes of parkland. It was a linear affair based mainly around the edge of the parkland on what would become the modern A529. Don't let its size back then put you off. This was a very important little village. If we zoom in, you can see here it had a few bits of note. In particular, the south was fairly built up, mainly around the Church of St Peter and the green just to the north of it. This area is the oldest part of Adderley, and it has most of the listed buildings in the village today. Further north it was a bit more sporadic, but there were little clusters of settlement, notably one near the railway station, which is marked here. This house on the corner was of great importance. It used to be a pub, but during World War I it became a military hospital. Look to the left and you can see there's a school. That's still there and it's still going. Quite a lot of Adderley's modern history is linked to Adderley Hall. That's no longer standing. It had to be demolished in 1955. Bits of its parkland are still here, but a lot has returned to agriculture. And so this is what it all looks like now. Adderley is a modern village which has been transformed from a linear one into a cluster of 20th century housing. Effectively, it's a pear-shaped village now, but most of its good bits are still on the A529. Our route around this one will include a substantial walk. I know, what is this sorcery? It'll be the first time we've had a proper amble around a Shropshire village. After driving through Spoonley and Tittenley, we'll have a quick look at Shavington Park to start off with. Then we're on foot from the church at Adderley, heading north via the A529 to Raven House. Between those 2 points, we'll pass the village hall, the bowls club, and a host of other notable features, such as the old market cross and church farmhouse. To go back south, we'll need to head east briefly to check out the railway cutting and the site of the Motte Bailey Castle that Adderley used to have. The rest is residential as we form a loop back to the church. The finish will see us go to the former Adderley Wharf on the Shropshire Union Canal. Before we get to Adderley, we have to drive through two little hamlets which the parish also covers. First up we have Spoonley, which is almost joined to Market Drayton. It's something and nothing, this place. It appears on the map, but it's not got a lot of note. Spoonley was formerly a township in the ancient parish of Adderley, and it consisted of little more than just a handful of farms. Not a lot has changed, it's still a rural hamlet which probably has far more sheep and cows than it does humans. Let's drive up to hamlet number 2. Now, don't laugh at the name of this one. This is Tittenley, which is very similar to Spoonley. It's basically farms and a lot of farmland again. That said, Tittenley also has a couple of very impressive buildings. We're about to pass through 2 of them on either side of the road. They're known as the Tittenley Lodges, and between them they account for 4 of the listed buildings of Adderley Parish. The lodges are a surefire way to know that you're entering an estate, and you most definitely are here. It's not Adderley though. After driving through the lodges, you're heading for Adderley if you follow the road to the right. To the left though, there's another road and it goes to Wilksley. Along that road is the entrance to a huge parkland. It goes by the name of Shavington Park, and it used to contain Shavington Hall. Shavington Hall was a former country house originally built in 1506 by the Needham family, who were later styled the Viscounts Kilmorey and Earls of Kilmorey. They had acquired the manor of Shavington in 1461. There can be no doubt that the Needhams were a wealthy lot. They were at one time the richest family in Shropshire, and the size of their home here went a long way to proving that. The house was already pretty grand in the 16th century, but they didn't stop there. It was rebuilt on a grander scale in 1685 by the 6th Viscount and became their official English seat. I use the word English there because the family were, and still are, based in Northern Ireland. They come from Newry in County Down. The 17th century iteration of the hall was eventually sold off by the 3rd Earl in 1885 to Arthur Pemberton Heywood Lonsdale, the High Sheriff of Shropshire, for 1888. The Heywood Lonsdales improved the hall upon purchase and bought several adjoining estates. However, nothing remains of Shavington Hall anymore. In a familiar tale for English country houses, it was demolished in 1959 because it became far too expensive to maintain. The massive 600-acre park it sat within, though, is still very much here, and it's still private land.
Okay, we've made it into Adderley village now, and I'm currently standing in the churchyard. The church is behind me, and that's our start point here for this little gentle walk around. Now, it's due to rain at some point today, but at the moment it's holding off. There's a bit of bright blue sky over in that direction over there, and it looks quite light across there, so it's not going to rain just yet. So I'm going to do this one without my coat on. Hopefully it doesn't start to bucket it down by the time I get back to the church later. We will see. Let's go walking.
We start our main walk at what is literally the largest landmark in Adderley today. This is the Church of St Peter on the A529 at the southwestern tip of the village. This might look like a normal rural church, but it's a bit of a strange one. Only part of it is in use. There's been Christian worship on the site of St Peter's Church for over 1,000 years, and it continues to this day. It holds special services through the year, including those at Harvest, Remembrance and Christmas, and of course its ever-popular Easter sunrise service. The nave and the tower are the only bits of it which are considered to be active. The chancel and the transepts are redundant, and as such they're under the care of the church's Conservation Trust. I don't think I've ever come across a church setup quite like that before. The interior was divided in about 1970 for the nave to continue in use as a place of worship and the rest of the church to be preserved by the CCT. The church's own records indicate this arrangement was formalised in 1956, but I guess it took 14 years to be put into practice. The oldest part of this church is the north transept, which was built in 1635 and 36 as a burial chapel for the Needham family, the Viscounts Kilmorey of Shavington. The tower is the second oldest part, built as it was in 1712. The rest of the church came along in 1801. The remainder was built by the architect Richard Baker, a name you won't be familiar with. That's because this church is his only known work. It's constructed of a yellowy grey sandstone, although the tower does feature some red sandstone as well, for a bit of character. In terms of stained glass, there are 12 heraldic panels here containing the Needham family arms. The oldest monument is a brass dating from about 1390. Another brass commemorates Sir Robert Needham, who died in 1556, and his wife Agnes, who died in 1560. There are two structures in the churchyard that are listed Grade 2. One is a mounting block dating from 1774, and the other is a red sandstone shaft, the remaining part of a former 18th century sundial. The sundial itself was stolen a number of years ago, and it's never been recovered. Now, in front of the church there's a modest village green. On it there's a stone column which looks like it might have been very important for some reason once upon a time. In actual fact, this column is proof that Adderley was once more important than Market Drayton. In centuries past, Adderley rivalled Market Drayton in terms of size. These days, there's no comparison. Market Drayton is a decent-sized town. However, Adderley once had an advantage. It lay on the salt route between the Midlands and Nantwich, which was a major salt-producing town. There was, therefore, a steady stream of pack animals that came through Adderley on a regular basis, and so trade was absolutely booming. This stone column is the only remaining part of Adderley's former market cross, which used to be situated on the corner of Rectory Lane.
Okay, so let's walk on up the A529 then into Adderley Village. Most of this village is new, or should I say modern, not new as such. It's been around for a few years, but the road is where it mainly grew up along, and there's some nice buildings along this road aside from the church, which you've just seen. This house right here is a good example. It's got a few windows boarded up, as you can see, a couple there, one in the corner there, but this one is one that people know around here, because as you come into the village on the A529, it's one you have to pass. Let's head north, and next to see is the massive frontage of Church Farmhouse, a 3-storey monolith of a building that was built in 1790. This is one of the 26 listed buildings in Adderley Parish. Incidentally, the only one that's Grade 1 listed is St Peter's Church. Close to Church Farmhouse, there was once a post office which doubled as a stagecoach post, often dealing with the changing of horses on the Shrewsbury to Nantwich route. It would eventually close and fall into disrepair before being restored and sold as a private dwelling in the 1960s. The post office then moved here to number 9 Adderley and became a general stores run by Tom and Betty Butter in the late 1960s. The general stores closed in 2010 and it's now a private dwelling known as Post Box Cottage. When Adderley was dealing with the pack horses from Nantwich, the main road through the village was the absolute dead centre of trade. There was once a smithy along its route, vital of course for the horses. There was also once a timber yard between the blacksmiths and Church Farmhouse. These days, with horses long gone, a different kind of horsepower provides people with transport through the village. No surprise then that Adderley Garage exists on the A529. It's the only business along the old pack horse route these days. A few more steps and we come to the Bowls Club on the right. As a subsection of Adderley Village Hall, this green is open all year round for its members. It has adequate facilities for both recreational and competitive bowlers. Adderley has at least 10 different teams. Wowzers. Adderley doesn't have a great deal of local facilities, but among them is that village hall. This opened in 1921 as a memorial to the local men who died in World War I. The men are commemorated on a brass tablet indoors. The hall replaced a club room which had become inadequate for village needs. Okay, so we're about to go around a left-hand bend in the road, and this is going around the edge of some what is now agricultural land mostly, but this had a different purpose once upon a time, and the big giveaway here is the wall that you can see there. This was the edge of some more parkland. It didn't belong to Shavington, instead it belonged to Adderley. After the bend in the road at the northern end of the village, look to your left and you'll see a drive. This was an entrance to Adderley Hall, the parkland of which still remains on the Shropshire landscape to the west of the village. Adderley Hall was no Shavington, but it was still a historic country house. There were 2 Adderley Halls, in fact. The first house was burned down and a new one replaced it in Victorian times, completed as it was in 1879. The replacement has now gone too. It was demolished in 1955. The estate's grounds now consist of largely arable farmland, but the north and south lodges remain as tangible links with the demolished house. Whilst there's not a lot of recorded history about the first house, which caught fire, we do know a lot about the Victorian replacement. The new hall was to be associated with another very important and wealthy family, the Corbetts. The surname is of French origin. It comes from the word corbe, which means raven in French. That's why the symbol on the Corbett family crest is a black raven.
They trace their ancestry to two barons found in the Domesday Book and probably derived from the Brereton and Essay region near Sees in Normandy. The Corbett family became one of the most powerful and richest of the landed gentry in Shropshire. The Shropshire Archives holds a collection of materials on the building of the new hall, a project that was undertaken by Henry Reginald Corbett. He called upon the architect George Davy to inspect the old house and make it habitable again. Davy concluded that little could be done on account of its condition after the fire and recommended it should be pulled down. In its place would be a new hall placed on an elevated position to the northwest of the original. The first part of the new hall to be constructed was the cellars, which reused materials from the old hall's demolition. The rest of the building was made of red bricks, which mostly came from a local brickworks, a hole somewhere between the church and a pool, according to records. Its windows and coping stones were made from the former portico columns that formed the entrance of the old hall. These were used because the stone was of a much higher quality than what could be purchased from the local quarry. Adderley Hall might still be standing today if the same attention to quality had been upheld throughout the rest of the house. Some sources indicate that rotten flooring would lead to the eventual demise of the property some 60 years after it was built. Architects reckon it could have been a wooden partition that was used to hold up the weight of the grand tiled roof that may have led to structural issues and rot. Rot was indeed a factor in the decision to demolish it in 1955. And so Adderley Hall is now just a distant memory. 3 years after the hall came down, the Corbett family sold the land it stood on. Aside from the entrance drive, one of the only other reminders it was ever here would be the old barns, which have now been turned into dwellings themselves.
Right, now next we're going to see a building that sports the Raven name. Raven, of course, being related to the Corbett family who were involved with the hall and the parkland that you've just learned about. Behind me here on Station Road, there's a house on the corner, which you can only partially see. You can see the end gable of it there. The rest of it is behind this hedge. This is Raven House.
Station Road now, and this big white building on the corner is called Raven House. It was built in 1824 and originally it was 3 houses. Behind the house is a courtyard, a barn and 3 farm labourers' cottages. In the late 1880s it was a pub, probably called the Raven Arms or the Raven Inn. Owned privately by the Corbett estate, Mrs. Catherine Corbett lent Raven House to the Red Cross for use as a military hospital during wartime. It was known as the Raven House Auxiliary Hospital, and it was for convalescing soldiers in World War I. Approximately 150 of them passed through Raven House. It was closed in September 1917 as it was too small for any further army use. In the November, Raven House became an Edith Cavell home of rest for nurses. About 600 nurses stayed there in its 10 years of service before finally closing down in 1927. Today, it's just another residence. This is the site of the former Adderley railway station, built by the Nantwich and Market Drayton Railway in the early 1860s. It opened in 1863, one day after the station at Market Drayton. The line was, from the start, run by the Great Western Railway. After nationalisation in 1948, it became part of British Railways, and it was eventually closed in 1963 by the British Railway Board. Although passenger trains ended in that year, freight trains were still running through Adderley until 1967. At the very end, it was almost a major event every time a train came through the village. Children would rush to the fence to watch it and duly get covered in smoke. The freight trains they would be seeing would be carrying things like farm machinery and livestock. Following the final closure of the line, the process of track lifting began in the late 1960s. A lot of the sleepers were sold to local farmers who found use for them in building farm structures. The railway cuttings, or batters as they were sometimes known, were all sold off. Some were bought by local farmers where they bordered their land, whilst others were bought by villagers who decided to build houses on them. With the ever-decreasing use of the tracks, the batters had become something of a playground for children before they were repurposed. Today, the railway cutting has become a wildlife sanctuary for many animals, including badgers, foxes, rabbits, stoats, weasels, pheasants, finches, and other birds. There were a number of goats belonging to Poole House who once thrived living on the railway banks by the station.
Now, the railway bridge is as far as we can walk on Station Road, but the road does carry on a bit further. It's a private drive though, so we can't walk down there. Now, if we could walk down there, we might see the site of a castle, and I found a bit of information about this. It's a bit annoying that I can't see it, but at least I can tell you about it.
Now, speaking of Poole House, that's over the railway cutting to the east. It's a notable area because it sits on and around what used to be a castle. Today up there are some earthworks and buried remains of both the castle and an 18th century ice house. The castle is believed to have been the principal holding of the Norman lord of the manor. In the early 12th century, that title was held by the Dunstanville family. A roughly circular, steep-sided glacial mound about 7 metres high was adapted and used to form the castle's motte. It's surrounded by undulating land and is approximately 65 metres in diameter at its base and 35 metres across the top. The summit of the motte is flat, but rises gradually from the northwest to the southeast. Quarrying for sand in modern times has modified the eastern and western parts of it. In the early 20th century, shards of 13th century pottery and part of a rim of a bronze cauldron were found at it. They appear to have been associated with a charcoal-rich deposit and burnt soil, suggesting that the structures that sat on top of the motte were burnt down at some point. In the 18th century, a brick-built ice house was inserted into the southeastern side of the mound. It was a type known as a cup and dome ice well. It served as the ice store for Poole House, a farmhouse of 16th or maybe 17th century date. Ice was probably obtained from a pond to the south. From here on in, it's a case of working our way back to the start, using the residential areas that lie between the old railway line and the main road where the church and the village hall both are. Adderley has seen a lot of infilling in recent times, as you're about to see. The south of the housing estate, which Adderley has become now, is marked by Rectory Lane. Here's a curious fact for you. Adderley once had two rectories. In 1789, Squire Sir Corbet Corbet agreed with Reverend Robert Clive, rector of Adderley Church, to replace the original rectory at Adderley Hall. The idea was to build a new rectory in the village, which ironically is now known as the Old Rectory. There's a newer one still called Cobscot Hay, which was built in 1866. It was the home of Athelstan Corbet, but later passed out of church hands in 1954, and it's been a private residence ever since. It's good to see, though, that it's never forgotten its connection to the Corbet family. The central street on the estate that's now in the middle of the village is called Corbet Drive, a hat tip to Henry, the man who wanted Adderley Hall rebuilt.
Okay, it's just started to rain. As I said, it is due at some point today. It's not terribly heavy at the moment, but I have taken shelter here in the book exchange. I'm going to run back to the car and then I'm going to drive down to the last thing in Adderley Village that we still need to cover, and that's the school. After that, we'll then head down towards the canal, and that's another episode in the books.
There's one thing we haven't seen in the village, and that's the school. It's located at the very northern edge of Adderley, and it was much easier to drive to this than walk to it, even though it's not all that far away from the drive we saw opposite Raven House. Adderley Church of England Primary School sits opposite the entrance to the Hall's Barns. It's a Victorian building that dates back to 1858. There were two schools in Adderley at one time. There was another one that originally served as Adderley Hall's garden house and laundry house. So to finish with, we need to have a look at the Shropshire Union Canal, which flanks the village to the east. Adderley once had a wharf on the canal, which had its own smithy and two lime kilns. None of that sort of industry is here anymore. The most you'll find are houses and a winding hole. If you were around for episode number 1 of this series, you'll already know a bit about the canal. The Shropshire Union, or the Shroppy as a lot of people know it, started life in 1797 and wasn't fully completed until 1835. It's over 66 miles long, end to end. The Adderley stretch was built as part of the Birmingham and Liverpool Junction Canal, the act for which was passed in 1826. It was among the last sections to be completed. It was then absorbed by the Ellesmere and Chester Canal in 1845 before becoming part of the Shropshire Union in 1846. The Adderley stretch has several bridges which all carry Grade 2 listings. They were all built in around 1830 by the engineers Thomas Telford and Alexander Easton. The one we're stood on here is Adderley Wharf Bridge. There are also locks on this stretch too. A man called Frank Butter was once the lockkeeper at Adderley. A former farm worker, he transformed the areas around the locks and the bridges into lawns and garden beds, spelling out the name Adderley in red, white and blue flowers on an embankment. His efforts won him the British Waterways National Competition and the Northwich Divisional Competition for the best maintained locks. Now, if only every lock on the canals of Britain had something like that, we'd really have a waterway network to be truly proud of. Okay, so that's 3 down in Shropshire. We're doing well, aren't we? And we finally got a decent walk in at last. Tomorrow we're going for a proper walk as we hit the first large-ish village in the county. Get ready for the tale of the braiding stone on the village green and how it was once used. Hello folks, welcome back to Shropshire once again. Now today I've got a village that's more of a village than anything you've seen so far. It's got a beautiful Jubilee Hall, which I can show you here. That's going to be our start point on the main walk. Now part of the way round this route we'll be seeing a village green. Not a very common thing here in Shropshire, and we'll discover why they're not a very common thing. But on the village green here, there's a special kind of stone which you don't want to be anywhere near on a Shrove Tuesday. Let's learn why. This is Norton in Hales. Norton in Hales, North Farm in a nook of land. We continue today through Shropshire as we take on a parish that's connected to several different people and families. This one is sure to get all the genealogists in the comments working overtime because Norton in Hales has so many families associated with it. Norton in Hales lies on the A53 between Market Drayton and Woore, Shropshire's most northeasterly village and parish. Staffordshire is to the east and Cheshire is to the west, meaning Norton is kind of within a piece of Shropshire that's not really Shropshire at all. As well as the main village, this one also includes 2 hamlets called Betton and Ridgewoodine. Betton has 2 country houses, one that was once lived in by the fascist leader Sir Oswald Mosley, and the other was a girls' school which later became a care home. It's the impressive Tunstall Hall. The engineer Samuel Owen, who later emigrated to Sweden where he became an industrialist, was born in Norton in 1774. As famous as he was, he's probably the second most important man in the village's history. Taking the honour would more likely be the Reverend Fred Silver. He was responsible for turning Norton into the village we know today, and in many regards. He'll get a fair few mentions in this one. On our walk, we'll encounter something called the braiding stone, which you wouldn't want to be anywhere near on a Shrove Tuesday. Let's find out why. Norton in Hales looked like this in 1900. It was a very rural, scattered parish and not a lot has changed. It seems hard to imagine now, given all the parklands and whatnot around here, that this bit of Shropshire used to be under a thick, dense forest, but it was. The only places which were fit for human habitation were in the clearings between the trees. 90% of the time, those clearings were man-made, created by people who had a bit of money. This is essentially how Norton in Hales ended up with so many country estates. On this map you can see there's Belleport Hall, Betton Hall, Tunstall Hall and the Brand, massive houses which were all connected with the various landowning families between the medieval period and the present day. Names like Broughton, Cotton, Moseley and Norcrop will feature heavily here. Norton village itself was in a clearing, but it developed more as a settlement than it did a country estate. By 1900, it had firmly established itself as an organised village, and it had typical village-like landmarks to accommodate a decent population. Some of these are still here. The church and the school are still going as strong as they were in these days. So too is the Hind's Head, the only pub in Norton in Hales. That's had a few names in its time. The chapel on this corner is no longer used, but it's still standing. The rectory, though, has now gone. Norton was a very linear village at this time, but it did have a centre, this village green. Perhaps the only thing that was outside of the main settlement that was of any real importance was the railway station. That's not there anymore because it closed in 1956. And this is what it all looks like now. Norton has become more of a clustered village with the addition of some modern housing, but essentially the shape and form of the older settlement hasn't altered. It still defines Norton from northeast to southwest. So, here's our route. After a drive through Ridgewoodine and Betton, checking out the likes of Tunstall Hall as we do, we'll start our walk through Norton at the Jubilee Hall, here on the main road. We'll head north, up Chapel Lane and into a relatively new housing estate, before making our way to the Green. There we'll learn about the Braiding Stone and then we'll go across the road to the church. Around the back of that there's a big playing field, which will serve as a turning point for us, before we make our way back to the Green to talk a bit about the Hind's Head pub. The school will follow, and from there it's an easy walk back to the beginning. We'll then hop in the car and check out the old railway station to the north, between the village and Belleport Hall. Our last job is then to go and see the remote chapel on the road out of here. Let's move. To understand Norton in Hales, you have to understand first that the village isn't the only thing that lies within the parish. In true Shropshire fashion, there are hamlets around here within the rural area to the south and west of the main settlement. This is Ridgewoodine. It's not a lot more than just a small farming community, but then villages of any substantial size around here were fairly uncommon. You see, this rural area was once blanketed by trees, and so there wasn't much in the way of open land. Trees do still account for a lot of the landscape here. There were certainly a lot of lavish estates in the trees. There were clearings, but they were usually man-made. One such clearing was for Belleport Hall, which was built in Tudor times for the Grosvenor family. Belleport would go on to be owned by the Cotton family. Another clearing had the Brand, another country house which was owned by the Grosvenors from about 1600. They sold that estate to the Davisons in about 1680. George Davison then remodelled Brand Hall in around 1700, and today it features the Styche family crest. That's because George Davison's grandfather was a Styche, but took his stepfather's name of Davison. The Davisons owned it until 1838, when it was sold to Perley Sillitoe, a very wealthy London merchant who was also a friend of the architect Sir John Soane. Ridgewoodine seems to have belonged to the Hinton family for much of its existence, but it doesn't seem to have ever had a country seat of its own. It's remained small and fairly nondescript, almost on the edge of all the fancier stuff. Let's drive on into Betton. There are three things of note in this little place, one of which is out of sight to the right of the shot here. Behind those trees is Betton Hall, which was once lived in by the Crompton family, who had a paper-making business in Bury, which is now in Greater Manchester. The firm was James R. Crompton and was established in 1856. The family was quite extensive. One member was Samuel Crompton, the inventor of the spinning mule used in the textile industry. Another was Richmal Crompton, co-author of the Just William book series from 1922 to 1970. Places like Betton Hall were fairly cheap for families like them. You could get a lot for £6,000 after all. The Cromptons bought it in the 1930s but vacated it in 1958. They did still continue to have some sort of connection to it until 2013, but I was unable to pin down exactly what that was. Betton Hall was also associated once with Sir Oswald Mosley. He was born in 1896 at Rollston Hall near Burton-on-Trent in Staffordshire, but when his parents separated, his mother took the children to live at Betton Hall, which was owned by her brother, the resident of Betton House. Oswald Mosley was a Tory MP and would go on to become the leader of the British Union of Fascists, or the Black Shirts as they were known. He married twice, first in 1920 to Lady Cynthia Curzon of Kedleston, and second to his mistress Diana, one of the 6 famous Mitford sisters.
So obviously we can't see Betton Hall, but we can see a couple of things in Betton. One of them is on this road. This is Moss Lane. There's a church here, which I believe is now a private residence, but I think it's quite cute.
On the right, just after the hall, there's a little lane that runs towards something called Betton Moss. On it, you'll see this, Betton Mission Church. I was expecting to find out quite a bit about this little church, but I was a bit unlucky. I found next to nothing. I was a lot more fortunate, though, with the next thing. This is Tunstall Hall, a Grade 2 listed building which dates from around 1732. It was formerly a girls' school, but it's now a residential home offering specialist care in dementia. In the late 19th century, it had extensive ornamental and kitchen gardens and was approached by a short, tree-lined drive. South of the hall, and partly bounded to the east by the River Tern, was a modest park crossed by drives giving access towards Market Drayton. As well as being a school, it was also historically the home of the Broughton-Adderley family. In 1783, part of the land around here was divided between heirs. A lady known only as Eleanor, who was married to a Reverend Broughton, had Tunstall Hall at that time. Tunstall remained with the Broughtons until World War II. As a care home, it's now owned by the St Philip's Care Group.
Right then, we've made it to Norton in Hales Village, and as you know already, our start point here is the Jubilee Hall. Let's get cracking.
Let's get this walk started with the Jubilee Hall at the southern end of the main road through Norton. This is the village hall, and it's used by both the village school and toddler groups on a regular basis. In addition, it welcomes a wide variety of village activities and private functions. On April the 26th, 1926, a public meeting was held in the school just down the road here in Norton to consider the question of whether the village should have a village hall. The meeting was unanimous that a hall was desirable, and after much discussion, steps were taken to erect one. In order that work begin immediately, interest-free loans were offered by Captain Radford Norcop and a Mr. and Mrs. Meadows, a sum that totalled £200. Sites were viewed and their owners interviewed, however nothing was decided until Captain Norcop offered a site on Drayton Road. The specification was for a hall 50 feet by 24 with a small room at one end. However, that would have cost £300. Luck, though, was on the village's side. As Park Hall Camp nearby was being dismantled, it was possible to get a corrugated iron hut pretty cheaply, and that became the first hall. Since then, it's been redeveloped and we actually have a proper building now, but one has to wonder if the iron hut hadn't have been acquired, would Norton have its own village hall these days? It was replaced in 1979, and the current building has served the village well ever since. Chapel Lane now, and on the corner where the road bends sharply to the left, there's the old chapel, which gives the road its name. Now, you might not instantly associate this building with actually being a chapel because it doesn't look terribly typical. It was for the primitive Methodists, this. The black door you can see here was the original entrance. The two windows to the left, which are now the lounge and the dining room of the house this has become, would have been the main worship area. The window to the right of the door was likely the vestry. Records from 1851 tell us it had seating for about 100 worshippers. It was originally built 16 years before that in 1835, but it was a lot smaller than it looks now. It's since been considerably extended. The modern name for the property is Chapel House.
Starting to rain again. Mind you, it's patchy enough that it's not bothering me, so we're okay right now. So beyond the chapel, the road looks like a bit like this. Looks like you're heading into the middle of nowhere. Well, if you take a right turn at this junction here, this will take you to the main sort of meat of Norton-in-Hales, if you like. There is a street on the left as well here, but Beswick Lane is where you need to go to find more of this village. Now, if you continue down here, it'll take you towards the church, it'll take you towards the village green, it'll take you towards the pub. Everything really that Norton-in-Hales has to its name. It's all clustered around one little specific area, really.
For most of its past, Norton has been an agricultural society. However, in the 17th and 18th centuries, there was a local iron industry at Norton Forge. A number of such forges existed along the River Tern, utilising water power to drive water wheels. Those, in turn, operated trip hammers to pound red-hot cast iron, turning it into the more useful wrought iron. The forges were heated by charcoal from local woods, and its production, no doubt, resulted in the destruction of remaining tree cover in the Norton area. Norton-in-Hales wouldn't be the village it is today without the huge input it had from one man, a former reverend called Fred Silver. He rebuilt some of the landmarks in Norton, including the school. He founded a museum in the old rectory and created a brand new burial ground too. Silver encouraged the farmers of the parish as well by presenting them with a brand new steam threshing machine. Norton was also free of cost as far as a parish doctor went, because Silver built his own surgery, which he kept well supplied with drugs. Norton is unusual in Shropshire because it has a village green. Greens were often a sign that a village was originally an organised settlement in what was previously woodland. Shropshire's lack of greens is a clear sign that most of the county used to be within a thick, dense woodland. Whilst Norton would certainly have been surrounded by trees, it must have been organised enough to be a sizable settlement in a clearing. In all likelihood, probably around half of the land it anciently covered had been cleared, leaving the remainder as woodland. So anyway, upon the village green today, you'll see this rock. This is known as the Braiding Stone, and it has a local tradition attached to it. It's said that anyone caught working after noon on Shrove Tuesday would be rather unceremoniously introduced to this. If you were guilty of that crime, and I use that term very loosely, you would be beaten, bumped or rolled on this stone, depending on which source you consult. It was also known as braiding or being braidled. This is how we get the archaic term to bray someone. It literally means to beat them up.
So next to the stone we have a sign, or a plaque or something, that says Shropshire Best Kept Village. Norton-in-Hales has won quite a few awards in its time, as you can see on here. There it is, right at the top, 1973, Norton-in-Hales, and 1975 in fact, actually. There's a few other awards on there, I'm not going to go through them all. I think it's deserving of it though.
Christianity was established at Norton in Hales between 669 and 672 AD through the exertions of Chad, the great missionary bishop of Lichfield. This is probably why the church at Norton in Hales is dedicated to St Chad, but that's only an educated guess, it's not concrete fact. Something else that's not clear is when the first church in the village would have been built. There's no record of one in the Domesday Book, so this would suggest it was built any time between 1086 and 1148, which is when the church finally appears within some records. It's not known what the first church in Norton looked like, but the villagers of the day would have been amazed to see it raising high into the sky. It would have been such a contrast from the simple wooden dwellings they would have all lived in. Little of the early church remains now. The current chancel was rebuilt in the 13th century, the west tower was rebuilt in the late 14th century, and the nave was rebuilt in the 19th. At the same time, further restoration of the church took place, giving us today's finished article. This church is pleasantly situated on a slightly raised portion of ground in the centre of the village at the parting of the roads from Audlem and Knighton. Its handsome square tower contains a neat-looking clock facing the main street. Church life would have dominated Norton before the Reformation for several reasons. One was simply because the manor of Norton in Hales was held by Shrewsbury Abbey. A special date for the villagers here would have been March the 2nd, the feast day of St Chad. What makes this church stand out would be the monuments you can find inside it. One of them is very famous. It's called the Cotton Monument, and it's the earliest known work of the architect Inigo Jones. It was commissioned following the death of Lady Frances Cotton in 1606. Lady Cotton died whilst giving birth, and so the monument, which is a tomb made from Derbyshire alabaster, depicts a design of her clasping a child in her arms. It was later amended to incorporate Sir Rowland, Lady Cotton's husband, who died in 1635. It was he who commissioned the tomb. Reverend Fred Silver also had a hand in the church, but perhaps more importantly, he made good use of two rooms in the old rectory next door. He turned them into a museum in the late 1800s and used them to display a unique collection of valuable curiosities. Now, of course, the building that stands here today isn't the same rectory. It's called the Old Rectory, but the one Fred Silver knew was far older. It's since been demolished and replaced with this house. Nonetheless, this is where the museum would have been. Open to the public, the museum included some paintings by the old masters, some Egyptian earthenware, a fine collection of Indian butterflies, and an actual sword worn and used by Robert Clive of India. How did Fred Silver manage to create this little museum then? Well, it was simple really. He was the son of the head of the London firm S.W. Silver & Co., who were Indian merchants and importers. You consider that and all of a sudden things start to make a bit of sense. It's not what you know sometimes in this world, it's who.
Now, given the weather today, it's not ideal for cricket, but in the summer, bring yourself to Norton in Hales and you can watch a game of cricket, because there is a cricket club here. Here we are on the playing fields. You can see we've got the pavilion over there, the cricket square, obviously not in use at the moment. There's a scoreboard over there, and then in this direction you have a children's play area, and you've got the bowling green as well. Now we're around the back of the church and the rectory, and we're on Norton's massive playing field and sports area. This features a bowling green, but it's also the home ground of the local cricket team, Norton in Hales Cricket Club. The cricket club was established in the 1920s and moved to this current location just after World War II. League cricket was first played here in the 1970s when the club joined the South Cheshire Alliance League. In the mid-1990s, league reorganisation saw them join the North Staffordshire and District League instead.
Now firmly established on this community playing field, the club has 4 senior teams, with 2 teams currently playing on Saturdays in the North Staffordshire and South Cheshire Cricket League. There are also several junior sides here as well, who play in other local leagues.
See that house there? That's the old post office, and that is right next door to Norton and Hales' pub. Come with me to the Hind's Head.
Norton has just the one public house, and it's called the Hind's Head. This has had several different names in its time. It's been previously known as the Colville Arms, the Griffin Arms Inn, the Crescent and Anchor, the Cotton Arms Inn, and the Hawk and Buckle. Early records show that it originated as the Hawk and Buckle at some point before the 1850s. It was occupied by various members of the Bloor family, whilst it was owned by the Cottons. Richard Bloor, one of the men who once occupied it, is buried at St Chad's Church. During its time, the pub hasn't just changed its name several times, it's also changed and modified its very use over time as well. This once served as a makeshift courthouse where the Norton Association for the Prosecution of Felons used to meet. There's none of that these days. As a community-run village pub and restaurant in front of that picturesque village green, the Hind's Head is now well known in Shropshire for serving locally sourced food where possible and offering traditional quality ales. Next we come to the school. Norton was no different to many rural villages in Victorian times. Social conditions in those days weren't very good, but as we know, Norton was lucky to have Fred Silver. When he arrived in the parish in 1850, one of his first tasks was to sort out the school. He wasn't short of money, and so renovating the day school, which was dilapidated and run down in the 1850s, he did at his own cost, rebuilding it completely. Education in the village then became far better, and today it's perhaps as good as it's ever been. Norton in Hales has had a school since the 1630s, when Margaret Higginson left £57 in her will for the founding of one. Sir Rowland Cotton would then provide a house and a barn for the schoolmaster's use, and hey presto, Norton had a full-blown school on its hands. There are several accounts of how the old school looked before Fred Silver came along. They aren't exactly fabulous. One I found described how there was no playground here unless you counted the street as being one. The same account went on to suggest it was little more than a hovel.
I reckon there was a forge in this area at one time. I don't know what gives me that idea. I mean, it might be something to do with the fact that the timber framed house you can see at the corner there is Forge House, and the lane off to the right is Forge Lane. I mean, you go on what you know, don't you? So I suppose there could well have been a forge at that corner. Anyway, after heading around that corner, we are almost back to where we started. Let me show you where we are. There is Chapel Lane. We walked up there earlier towards the chapel, and the Jubilee Hall is in this direction. So we've formed a nice neat little circuit around Norton in Hales. Now we still have two more things that I want to talk about before we end this episode. One of them is the old railway station, which we're about to drive to, and the other one is the remote chapel.
Before we leave, we have to check out what became of Norton in Hales' railway station. You can find it to the north of the village, just a handful of yards away from the junction between Belleport Road and Beswick Lane. This one was on the North Staffordshire Railway line. The line through Norton in Hales ran between Stoke-on-Trent and Market Drayton. The station was opened in 1870 and closed in 1956. The station's site, which includes the station master's former house, is all now private residences. The line has been lifted, but its route is still traceable. Now, of course, the railway line from Market Drayton to Stoke had several stations. Norton was just one of them. There were also stations at Pipegate, Keele and Newcastle-under-Lyme. Residents of Norton were very well served by this railway, if they could afford a ticket, that is. In 1892, it was possible to catch the 8:42 AM train in Norton, change at Stoke and be in London Euston by 12:55 PM. Now, who says commuting into London is a modern luxury, eh? In the period just before World War I, there were 7 or 8 trains in each direction from Norton every day. There were also special trains run from Stoke, bringing large crowds to Norton for the annual Harvest Home festivals. Visitors were attracted to the rectory grounds, where a meal was provided under canvas, and the Market Drayton Town Band were playing. So why did this line eventually fail? Well, after World War II, bus services were seriously affecting passenger transport, and lorries were favoured over rail freight. The line was simply falling out of favour, and so on the 7th of May 1956, the last train ran through Norton. On the road to the next one, there's something called the remote chapel. Maps often refer to this as the old chapel or the old graveyard. Those are wrong. This is actually a burial ground that was secured by, who else, Reverend Fred Silver, in 1864. It was to be a brand new cemetery. Situated 1/3 of a mile from the village on the road to Knighton, it was consecrated in 1865. The graveyard is very pretty, with a view of the high land of Muckleston and Ashley Heath stretching towards the east. In the middle of it all, there's the remote chapel itself. You certainly can't deny the work Reverend Silver did to enhance this parish, and the remote chapel is up there with his best ideas. He earned himself widespread popularity and fame before dying in 1884, having been in the parish for some 34 years. 4 down and 1 more to go this week in Shropshire. I've saved the best one until last this week too. Tomorrow we're off to the most northeasterly village in the county, and it sits between Cheshire and Staffordshire in a piece of Shropshire that sticks out from the rest. I'll see you there.
Hello folks, welcome back to Shropshire for the last time this week. Now, I have saved the biggest one this week until last. This place is a village that's in Shropshire, but it thinks it's in Cheshire. Welcome to Woore. Woore, wavy trees. Wrapping up the week in Shropshire, we have the most northeasterly village and parish in the county. This is Woore, and yes, that is how you pronounce this. It's not Woore, it's exactly the same as saying war as in World War I or World War II. It's a funny old name, actually. So much so that nobody's really 100% sure what the heck it even means. People can only agree on one thing: it's a reference to something that moves. I saw a few ideas, like maybe a quaking bog for example, but it's more likely to be related to trees. Remember, this was all once a dense forest. There is another theory to the name. In ancient Celtic or Anglo-Saxon, the word Ure, spelt O-U-R-E, meant boundary, and this would fit nicely with the fact that it's on the boundary with both Cheshire and Staffordshire. The trouble is, that's purely a coincidence and not a hard fact. Woore is definitely in a bit of a strange place. It's on a piece of land that sticks out from Shropshire into Cheshire, and the eastern border is flanked by Staffordshire. It's a 100% Shropshire village, but according to several accounts I found, this place thinks it's in Cheshire. Woore used to have a race course. Did you know that? It was a national hunt course, and it was located to the south of the village in a little hamlet called Dorrington Lane. It was served by a railway station at Pipegate, but both are long gone. Let's see what's here today as we go walking in Woore. Here's what Woore Parish looked like in 1900. What might not be immediately obvious from this map is just how much land this one covers. Woore Village sits in the northern section of the parish boundaries, but those borders extend a long way south, taking in two long strips of land. In one of them is the hamlet of Bearston, and in the other is Pipegate. One's famous for fruit, the other is famous for a creamery. Both of them are on the other side of another hamlet called Dorrington Lane, where there was once a racecourse. The boundaries haven't altered at all since these times. Woore Village hasn't changed itself a lot either. As you can see, it was centred on a crossroads where two important routes met each other. These days we know those roads as the A51, which goes north to south, and the A525, which goes east to west. Anything that was anything was built on those two roads, and mostly it was all around the meeting point. This map shows two pubs, but there were at least three. Pubs and inns were important to Woore because this place was on the old posting route between Chester and London. The Swan Hotel, which is marked by name here, is no longer in business, but it does still stand. Also still standing is St Leonard's Church, and one of the two chapels are on this corner as well. The school is still here too, but it's now a private house. Woore does still have a school, but it ain't there. The other thing to note here is Sillenhurst Moat. That's still the same as is shown here. Arguably, it's the most historic part of Woore Village, and we'll be sure to explain why. Woore has grown a bit since the time of this map. Let's see how. Expansion has come in the form of new estates to the north and some cul-de-sacs to the south, but essentially this is still the same crossroads village it's always been. It's still defined heavily by the routes of the A51 and the A525. So this is how we're going to tackle Woore. It's not going to be a complicated route, but it is going to be the longest one we've done so far in Shropshire. We'll start by driving through the hamlets of Bearston and Pipegate before checking out what used to be at Dorrington Lane. Then, after heading through Islands Cross, we'll begin the walk at Grove Crescent off the A51. From there, we'll go north up to the crossroads where the A525 comes into play. That'll take us past the village hall, the tennis club and the school, as well as a couple of other bits. A left turn then onto the Audlam Road, and we're going to form a loop around these top sections, which are mainly housing, but there's some bits of note too, such as Sillenhurst Moat. Crossing the A51 will take us to these estates, but we won't be there for long.
There's a handy footpath that links those to the bowling green, and we're back on the A51 in no time. We'll pass the Swan Inn and the church before hitting the Woore Country Shop on the other side of the crossroads. It'll then be a case of following the A51 back to the start. We start with a little drive through the hamlet of Bearston in the southwestern corner of Woore Parish. Bearston is in a bit of a weird place. Its nearest village is actually Knighton, but that's over the border into another parish. Pipegate on the other side of Knighton, though, is also in Woore. Bearston was historically never associated with Woore. It was its own manor at one time, and within it was Belleport Hall, the grand mansion-like house that was lived in by the wealthy Cotton family we learned about yesterday in Norton in Hales. These days, Bearston is more associated with another family, that of Roberts. Established in 1971, the Roberts family own Bearston's best-known landmark. It's a pick-your-own fruit farm, which originated with a modest field of strawberries. Founder Owen Roberts and his son John embarked on the endeavour, initially selling fruit from a farm van. Now the farm's offerings have expanded to encompass not just strawberries, but also raspberries and an array of other fruits and vegetables. They even have pumpkins at Halloween. Now we're in the hamlet of Pipegate, which is to the south of Woore on the A51. This isn't much more than a collection of housing these days, but it has a lot of history to it. Let's get the ball rolling with this pub. This is the Chetwood Arms, located at the end of the Bearston Road. This comfortable pub was once a proud part of Punch Taverns, but today it's owner-occupied. It has a small bar area, but concentrates more on food. As such, it has a large dining area with a wide and varied food selection. A large section of land to the rear allows for camping and caravans.
So you'll find the Chetwood Arms on the A51, which is here, this road. And this runs into Woore from the south. Now before you get to Woore, there's a series of small hamlets and other settlements which we need to cover. One of them is called Pipegate, and that is where the main railway station was in this parish. It's not there anymore though. Let's go see what's there now.
The Chetwood Arms is within easy walking distance of Pipegate's other major landmark. There used to be a railway line here which crossed the A51, and Pipegate had a station on it. The line in question was the same one that passed through Norton in Hales, Market Drayton to Stoke-on-Trent. Construction of Pipegate Station began on the 29th of July 1864, but the first train didn't run through the area until 1870. The station served the hamlet, but it was named Pipegate for Woore, mainly because Woore has always been the bigger and much more important village around here. The early years of the 20th century were the busiest for the station, with 13 trains daily from Stoke to Silverdale and 5 to Market Drayton. Rail motor services began in 1905, intended to compete with trams, and were somewhat successful in this respect, although they only lasted until 1926. The section between Silverdale and Pipegate was reduced to single track in 1934. Dwindling passenger numbers after World War II meant that there were only 2 trains daily from Stoke to Market Drayton, and soon all passenger services ceased at Pipegate. The last day was the 7th of May 1956. As we know from yesterday's episode, most of the line has disappeared now after being lifted, but at Pipegate a large amount of rail still exists on the eastern edge of the former station, running back towards Silverdale. Why it was left is a mystery. It serves no purpose now. Even after the loss of Pipegate for passenger trains, the line continued to serve freight trains for a while, and you don't need to go far to understand why. Literally just to the south of the station site, there's an area of modern housing. It stands on the site of Henry Edwards' dairy. A Officially, it was a branch of a larger chain called Express Dairies. This was the site of a creamery, and it had a private siding that gave access to Pipegate Station. That allowed its preferred transport partner, the GWR, to provide milk trains to the facility for onward scheduling to London. Another reason Pipegate Station was well used can be found to the immediate north in a small hamlet called Dorrington Lane. This is where Woore Racecourse was located until it ceased to operate in 1963. Today, very little remains of it, but you can still see evidence of it on some overhead maps. Woore Racecourse was a national hunt horse racing venue, and it sat on some farmland that was owned by a man called Mr. Ick, who leased it to the racecourse company. It wasn't the largest track in the world in terms of length, it measured 1 mile around its circumference. It had a series of very sharp left-hand bends, and horses had to gallop over a bridge between the last 2 jumps. As the course was constantly turning, it paid to be close to the rails. According to former jockey Bernard Wells, riding felt like going round the inside of a saucepan. Sounds fun. Since the course was also used for grazing when it wasn't holding races, it was regularly covered with cowpats. As you can imagine, that was an unpleasant experience for the jockeys, who would often end up covered in at the end of the race. Low-hanging branches also made riding difficult. Racing at Woore has been around since the late 19th century. Initially, they were held on a different site, with the first ones ever recorded being in 1883. When it was decided that that course was unsuitable, a new one at Dorrington Lane held its first race in 1885. Woore had its most successful period between the 2 world wars, when despite the existence of just a single wooden grandstand, its popularity drew crowds in excess of 1,500. In 1937, even King George VI attended to watch his horse, Slam, take part in the Betton Hurdle. By the end of World War II, Woore held 3 meetings a year, and in 1952 a 4th meeting was added. Muckleston, another village not far away, held point-to-point meetings, and it was common for racegoers to attend meetings on Easter Saturday there and then travel to Woore for a meeting on Easter Monday. When Pipegate Railway Station closed, access to the course became a lot more difficult. Woore Racecourse, though, still expanded, gaining extra buildings from a Bedford aerodrome, which were converted into a steward's room, a weighing room, and a restaurant. The final meeting was held on the 1st of June 1963, although it wasn't known it would be the last meeting at the time. The Levy Board had announced a couple of months previously that it would be withdrawing funding from Woore, along with several other racecourses. This left the course in a precarious financial situation. Nevertheless, the lease on the course wasn't set to expire until 1965, so it was originally hoped that racing could continue. Accordingly, 3 one-day meetings were scheduled for 1964. The problem was that one of them was for Easter Saturday, which clashed with the Muckleston point-to-point meeting run by the North Staffordshire Hunt. When the Hunt were refused permission to postpone, they bought the entire assets of Woore Racecourse and then sold them off. Today, very little remains to suggest the existence of a racecourse here. Part of the racecourse stable block survived until 2005 as a livestock barn until it burnt down. The land is now used by the Bearston Stud breeding operation, maintaining a thoroughbred racing link to the area. Now, to get into Woore, we've got another little hamlet to pass through using the A51. It's called Ireland's Cross. You'd have thought with a name like that, this would have some sort of history to it that was obvious. Apparently not. If anyone knows why this is called Ireland's Cross, let me know in the comments down below. Okay, so we've made it into Woore village, and that black cloud behind me there is apparently going to follow me. So I'm just going to nip back to the car and grab my coat, and then we will walk around Woore. It's the biggest village that we've got so far in Shropshire, and it's got quite a bit to talk about, quite frankly, so we better get on with it before I get too wet. After parking at Grove Crescent, landmark number 1 in Woore is just a few paces up the A51. This is the War Victory Hall. It serves as both the village hall and the main war memorial for the village. Its history can be traced back to the 1920s when the original hall was built on this site. It was an old wooden hut erected as a memorial to those who died in World War I. In 1950, 5 years after the end of World War II, that hut was replaced by a brand new building dubbed the Victory Hall. It was designed to honour the fallen in both World Wars. For the 75 years since, it's done the same job. With 2025 being the 75th anniversary of its construction, this year there's been an exhibition here detailing the history of the hall, not just since 1950, but also since the 1920s when the original wooden hut was here instead. Unfortunately, a lot of paper records for it have been lost over time. So, to create the display, the hall's management collated information from local newspapers and local residents, both past and present. The exhibition took place on the weekend I was here, between the 31st of October and the 2nd of November. The Victory Hall opened on November the 2nd, 1950. The exhibition also displayed panels from the Men of War project, highlighting the often short lives of the soldiers that are commemorated on War's War Memorial. After the 75th anniversary weekend, the panels were then moved to St Leonard's Church to be on display for Remembrance Sunday. So let's head up the road into the centre of War by following the A51 into the middle of the village, where it's crossed by the A525. These are the only two major roads War has. The A51 is the much more important of the two because it used to be the old post road between London and Chester. Our next landmark is the tennis club. This is a welcoming, friendly, sociable, active and fun space in which to enjoy the racket-based sport. War Tennis Club is affiliated to the Lawn Tennis Association, which is the national governing body for tennis. The club was established in 1983 and for 30 years operated from a single leased court situated in the grounds of War Manor House, just up the road. In 2013, that property was sold and the club found itself without a home, threatening its very future. However, thanks to the generosity of long-time members, a private court in a nearby village became the club's temporary home for over a year, while a new site was found for a permanent home. 2 years on, the club found themselves here at this amazing facility in the heart of War Village. Just up the road we've got War Primary School. The school we saw on the maps at the beginning of this video was on the other side of the A51. That building still stands, but it's now been converted into a house. War Primary School has since moved to this newer premises. Despite the size of the village, this school only had 57 children on its roll in 2017, although it was noted at the time that it wasn't full to capacity. I would imagine it's now full because War has expanded somewhat in recent years.
Now, there used to be several pubs here in War, but there's only one these days that's still serving pints. For now, at least. There could well be another one again soon. We'll discuss that in a bit. The one that's still open is up here. It's behind that telegraph pole, and it gives its name to the field that the cricket club play on. Let's check them both out.
Next we have War Cricket Club, who play in the North Staffordshire and South Cheshire League, the same competition in which the club at Norton in Hales participate. War play at this, the Falcon Field, which has a dramatic downward slope. I'd imagine that makes it fun to play on. War Cricket Club was founded just over 125 years ago. They are an amateur side run by volunteers. The club runs 2 senior cricket teams which play on Saturdays, and they also have a Sunday side which focuses on friendly matches, allowing opportunities for all standards to get involved. The cricket club is also very social and holds an annual fireworks display evening in conjunction with the pub, from which this ground takes its name. In addition, there's normally a summer event on the field. War Parish Council have often supported this club with grant funding. So here's the pub. This is the Falcon Inn, and at present this is the only one that's currently open in War. There were at least 2 others, but the Swan Inn has become a block of flats, and the Cooper's Arms is currently closed and awaiting new tenants. More on them later. Barring some alterations to its external appearance, the Falcon hasn't changed much since it was originally built in the 19th century. A lot of people will know this as being a Marston's pub, owned and managed by the Marston's Brewery in Burton-upon-Trent. Now we've reached the middle of the village where the A525 runs into the A51. As you can see, this isn't a standard crossroads, it's a staggered crossroads, so to continue on through Woore using the A525, you have to jink right and then left, in whichever direction you come from. On the corner, on the same side of the A51 as the Falcon, you'll see an entrance drive between some gate piers. This leads to the Manor House. It's a 5-bay, 2-storey house that dates from around 1800. It was likely probably built for a guy called George Watkin Kenrick. Also likely is that it was a replacement for a house which had been in the Kenrick family since around 1600. Older work may survive in its large rear extension, which is mainly late 19th and 20th century. The house was last for sale in 2013, and I've got no idea who lives in it today. However, one family that definitely did were the Adams family, and no, their number did not include anyone called Morticia, Gomez, Pugsley or Wednesday, and there was definitely no Uncle Fester or Cousin It. Adams is a name synonymous with Woore, as we'll learn shortly.
Well, I promise you I don't purposely time things like this, but isn't it appropriate that we talk about the Adams family on Halloween? Today is October the 31st. Now next we need to go up Audlam Road, and on the corner of Audlam Road is this building. That's next.
Also on the corner, on the other side of the A525, there's a Methodist chapel. Now, do you remember at the beginning of this video on the maps there were 2 chapels marked on this corner? Well, the sites of both buildings are still in use, but only one is a chapel. Woore Wesleyan Methodist Chapel was built on a piece of land given by a Mr. John Smith at the junction of Audlam Road and London Road in the 1870s. With capacity for about 200 worshippers, a chapel was built on that land, and it opened on Sunday the 17th of September 1876. However, it was partly demolished in 1971 because the roof had become unsafe. A new chapel was then constructed on the same site, and it was to become the current Woore Methodist Church. It's on the same site as the old one, but it has a slightly different footprint. The locals affectionately know this little building as the chapel on the corner today. I mean, it's not wrong, is it? It's a chapel and it's on a corner. As I mentioned before though, there were 2 chapels on this junction. So what's happened to the other one? Well, literally next door, there's a bakery which was founded in 1932. This is G&P Snape & Sons, who have been baking homemade specialty breads, morning goods, savouries and patisserie for over 80 years. Generations of Snape's bakers have provided all that and more to Woore Village. Run by twin brothers Alistair and Robbie Snape, who are trained real bakers, the bakery is currently expanding. Most of its customers do not have time to bake their own bread the real way. They want healthy, nutritious artisan bread, not the bland and unhealthy stuff that's usually offered by supermarkets. In 1833, a primitive chapel could be found here instead. It had seating for 120 worshippers. It was still in use in 1941, but was demolished soon afterwards, being replaced by the current bakery building. This means Snape's, founded in 1932, remember, must have started elsewhere.
I think the rain stopped now. It's definitely fits and starts with it today. It's not constant, it's just coming in waves. And so the sun's come back out again now, so this should make the next section look fantastic. So where are we going? So we've come up the A51 to the crossroads, we've taken a left turn, we're on the A525. We're not going to be here for very long, because sort of behind the camera right now there's a big housing estate. We need to walk through that towards Sillenhurst Moat. That's next on our list.
As we learned at the school a few moments ago, war has grown a bit in recent times. It's gradually developed over the centuries, but the quickest expansion has been since the turn of the millennium. In 1981 it had a population of 991, today it's 1,348. Shropshire's council tax records reveal there are almost 600 households in Woore now, a figure that's risen over 20% in just over 5 years. So where are all the additional houses then? Well, we already know part of that answer. The old dairy site at Pipegate has 50 of them. These are some of the others. It's an estate concentrated on the northern edge of the village, facing the historic Sillenhurst Moat site across Candle Lane. There are 55 houses on this estate. Additionally, there's more new properties at Islands Cross, and there are 10 new ones at Pipegate Station too. So what is Sillenhurst Moat? Well, that's what you can see here from this new street called Sillenhurst View. Arguably, it is the most historic landmark Woore has to its name. Let's explain what it is and why it's so important. The Domesday Book entry for Woore, which by the way spelt it W-A-U-R-E, shows the ownership of the manor. It was held not by Earl Roger of Shrewsbury, as some suspect, but by a tenant-in-chief called William Malberdeng, commonly known as William Malbank. At that time, it contained a large hall within the moated site at what is now Sillenhurst Farm. It would have been the principal property in the village back then. The rest of Woore consisted of just 5 houses. Everything else was woodland, which could accommodate, get this, 60 pigs. William Malbank also held land at Dorrington, Gravenhunger and Onley, all of which had fewer houses than Woore. He'd succeeded pre-conquest Saxon lord Edric. In later medieval times, the most notable family of Woore was the de Bulkleys, but it's not known if they ever lived here. The remains of the moat include earthworks in an area of undulating land close to the farm. The rectangular moated island, which has maximum dimensions of 50 metres north to south by 54 metres east to west, was originally surrounded by water on its western, southern and eastern sides. The remains of a brick-built structure were found on the island at the end of the 19th century. There are now no visible traces of any buildings, although fragments of brick and tile can still be seen embedded into the sides of the moat. The southern moat arm still retains a little bit of water.
Don't believe everything you see on Google Maps, people. There's meant to be a gap in the hedge that you could see in the foreground of those last few shots of Sillenhurst there. There is no such gap. I've had to walk all the way round. But to be fair, now that the rain stopped, I don't mind, to be honest with you. Bright blue sky up there, check this out. That's the best weather I've had all day long, would you believe it? And this is the last village of the day. It's just my luck, that.
Now we've got a bit of a walk to do through some more residential areas, and so this is the perfect time to tell you about some of the famous people that Woore has been home to. You can't mention famous people of Woore without first of all citing William Bridges Adams. Born in Woore in 1797, he was a locomotive engineer and a writer. He was best known for his patented Adams axle, which was a successful radial axle design in use on railways in Britain until the end of steam traction in 1968. He also invented the railway fishplate. His writings, including English pleasure carriages and Roads and Rails, covered all forms of land transport. Later he became a noted writer on political reform under the pen name Junius Redivivus, a reference to a political letter writer of the previous century. Also born in Woore in 1936 was Albert Lightfoot, a cricketer who made his name at Northamptonshire County Cricket Club. He died in 2023 after a glorious cricketing career, which will always be remembered for one infamous reason. Against Richie Benode's 1961 Australians, Northamptonshire needed 198 for victory in 2.5 hours, and Lightfoot's gallant half-century helped reduce the target to 4 runs off the final over. With 1 ball to go, the scores were level. Australian Alan Davidson bowled to Malcolm Scott, who missed, but set off for a bye to acting wicketkeeper Bobby Simpson. Lightfoot inexplicably stayed put at the non-striker's end, and Scott was run out, meaning Australia escaped with a draw. On the sporting theme, Woore is also associated with Nick Hancock, the TV presenter who used to be the host of the sports-themed quiz They Think It's All Over. He came from Stoke, but he once owned a £1.1 million mansion near Woore. We've now wandered into the area that contains Woore's bowling club, and this has been in the local news of late. Earlier this year, Woore had their best season ever in the local bowling leagues, ending up with a promotion for the first time ever to the Shropshire Premier League. That's not all they achieved this year. They were also Market Drayton League winners, Whitchurch League winners, and Shropshire Cup champions. The good news was great, not just for the people of Woore, but also to players from other clubs who were thankful that next year they won't be playing them.
Okay, we found our way back to the main road, to the A51. Behind me there, you can see what used to be the second of the pubs here in Woore. It's not a pub anymore because it's been turned into a block of flats now. It's called Swan Court, but it used to be called the Swan Inn, or the Swan Arms, or the Swan Arms Hotel even. It had a few different variations. Most people just know it as the Swan. Let's talk a bit about it.
When the A51 was the post road between London and Chester, Woore had a place where horses could be changed. It was available here at the former Swan Inn. This is now a block of flats, having ceased to be an inn several years ago. It went through something of a tumultuous time before it finally became flats. This can be seen best by using Google Street View imagery. In 2015, it showed a huge sign outside it saying under new management. It didn't last. The 2016 image shows it boarded up and looking rather forlorn. Okay, next up we have St Leonard's Church. When the Swan was busy changing horses in the post road days, the site of this church was where the stables were. This church is therefore not very old, but it's the only one the village has ever had. That seems crazy, given its size. This was constructed in around 1830 to serve what were then 5 townships of the Shropshire portion of the ancient parish of Muckleston, which is in Staffordshire. This is one of the most unconventional 19th century churches you will ever see. It's made of a white plaster and it's built to an Italianate design. It was the brainchild of the architect George Hamilton of Stone, but the bell tower is an Edwardian addition by Chapman and Snape of Newcastle-under-Lyme. The tower has no bells because it's not been safe to regularly ring in since the late 1980s. You do still hear chimes at this church though, because the bells have been replaced by a timed recording. See, I told you this one was unusual, now didn't I? It still carries a Grade 2 listing, and it was last repainted in its distinctive bright white in 2011. The churchyard contains the grave of a World War I soldier too. Just down the road, we're back to the crossroads of the A51 and the A525. There's another white building on this corner, and it's the Cooper's Arms. This is the final pub on the walk, but as you can see, this one's not pulling pints right now. It's been closed long term since 2021. However, Star Pubs and Bars, a company which we've met before in places such as the Derbyshire Dales, have a significant refurbishment planned which will transform the Coopers into a food-led modern country pub. This will then feel, so they say, like a completely new venue. The plans include a rejuvenated deck terrace, which will become a beautiful alfresco dining area, supporting the new focus on great food. The pub frontage will benefit from a modern redecoration, adding new signage and lighting to make the site more visible. They're hoping, what with Woore being a pretty affluent village, that the local demographics will keep it in business very easily. Sited on the crossroads, it does have the potential to be the pub in Woore. All they need is the right person to take it all on.
Yeah, it looks a bit worse for wear at the moment, but if the right person was to run the Cooper's Arms, I imagine it would be an absolute delight to do so. The thing that puts me off potentially running a pub like this, though, is the fact that even though it's busy in this village centre, the noise would be an issue for me. But you know, some people could cope with that, I suppose. Now, the fact that this village centre is busy is good for business in another way, because over the road we have the shop, and next door to that there's another shop. This is going to start our final section now, which is walking back down the A51. On the other side of the road, there's a business that's already able to take advantage of Woore's affluence. This is the Woore Country Store and Post Office, which has served the village for years, and it shows no signs of stopping anytime soon. For most of its life, this has led a fairly uneventful existence, but it did hit the news in 2017 when Woore's residents kicked up a fuss about construction traffic passing through the village, heading for sites connected to the controversial HS2 railway line. The plans were for around 500 lorries per day to pass through the crossroads on which this is located, something that worried the store owner at the time. This led to a campaign which aimed to urge HS2 bosses to find an alternative route instead. There's another shop nearby which I think is worth a mention as well. This is commonly referred to in Woore as the Tudor House. Officially it's number 15 The Square. As a shop, it's currently housing an antique dealers called Renovation and Reclamation, or R&R for short. A house originally, it was built in the early 17th century before being remodelled in 1905. You can see why it gets called the Tudor House, can't you? It's the black and whiteness that sort of gives that away. It carries a Grade 2 listing, and rightly so. It's a great focal point in the middle of Woore. The last landmark on the walk is the old school, which we saw on the maps at the beginning of this video. Now, I have no idea when the school moved over the road to the modern premises, but my best guess would be at some point after World War II. To finish with, we have a drive away from Woore using the A525 as we head into a small village on the border with Staffordshire. It's called Onley. Most of it falls within Staffordshire and not Shropshire, so we'll leave it for another episode. Otherwise, that's it for Woore, folks. And with it, we've completed the first run in Shropshire. I have no plans to come back to the county again this year, but keep your ears to the ground in 2026. I may well make a return then. We still have 196 of these to put on the map, and if they're all like this, they're going to be great.
Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.